So, Mr. Kenny, thank you for agreeing to do this with me today. You're always chatting about various subjects, and we just got talking about Veterans Day. Can you just give me the context of that and why that fell on today?
It's the end of World War I formally ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. But that was actually almost a year after the physical shooting stopped. And that was agreed to, an armistice was to happen at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month.
Okay.
And today is November 11th. So it was originally called Armistice Day because that's when the shooting stopped. But then when we had World War II and the Korean War, etc., they changed it to Veterans Day to honor all veterans.
So do you have any relatives that died in the military or anything like that? Do you have any family connections?
Not that I'm aware of. My father served in World War II as a physician. I'm sure he saw some horrible things. But the veterans of World War II didn't come home and talk much about it.
Really?
Their experience now, they just...
Was that a PTSD thing or what?
No, it's... Tom Brokaw wrote a book, and they've often been referred to as the greatest generation. These are guys that went over there. They never thought of themselves as particular heroes. Mm-hmm. I mean, they did some incredible things. And they came back and went back to work and started the suburban movement, and nobody heard of PTSD back then.
Yeah.
But a lot of them ended up with, a lot of them turned to alcohol. The most decorated American soldier of World War II, Audie Murphy, he became a movie star, but he slept every night with a pistol under his pillow.
Wow.
He used to have all kinds of nightmares and stuff. So it was just kind of so this is a generation that went through the Great Depression, World War II, and came back and started families and all that.
And that provoked... Funny, we're sitting in an economics classroom. That provoked something of an economic boom, didn't it?
Oh yeah, it did.
The war.
It did, because the recession had crippled the U.S. and Europe, and World War II really brought us out of it. Everybody was working. Women entered the labor force for the first time in big numbers. People were soldiers. They got income, not a lot to spend it on. Nobody was going to buy a tank or an M1. And so, yeah, it was a pretty prosperous period after. A lot of people had income. And
they talk about the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
That's what they're referring to.
And one of the guys that first suggested that may be a problem was Dwight Eisenhower, the general of all the Allied forces during World War II. He came back and became president, and he said, that could be a problem, this military-industrial complex that the military and industry may have an enormous influence, and some of it might not be good.
So, just to be clear, when I was younger, I first heard about the complex. I think I didn't know, that word confused me. Is that basically a relationship or?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Big power and big money, and even today, a lot of these generals retire and they go work for Boeing or something like that. And, yeah, it's, he just worried that the average citizen was going to kind of get left by the wayside by the power of certain groups. Special interests in general, I would say, but that was the group right then and there.
And so, did that start, like that boom, was that the start of a deficit kind of...
Now, the deficit...
Does that have anything to do with it?
No, the deficit really came out of World War II.
Really?
Because countries had to spend much more than their revenue for all these arms. I mean, the United States, they were turning out an airplane a day in manufacturing. I mean, and the number of boats, at the landing of Normandy, there were 5,000 ships. A huge navy today, like the United States, is a little over 300 ships.
Wow.
So, 5,000, 10,000 aircraft. I mean, the numbers were enormous. And so they ran a deficit. But no, deficits for years afterwards were pretty much under control until...
Oh, really?
1968 or so, Lyndon Johnson became president, and he started the so-called Great Society. At the time, we were involved in the Vietnam War as well, so we were spending tremendous monies over there, and yet at the same time, we started the Environmental Protection Agency, the Civil Rights Act, all kinds of things to make supposedly domestic life better. Well, that had never been done before. You never carried on a war and tried to spur, and that started the deficits. And Medicare increased greatly, Medicaid and Medicare and welfare, and we haven't stopped.
Was that a burden too great to handle, do you think?
Well,
to take on all that?
It could have been probably done better. Though I think everybody was pretty gung-ho for it at the time. But as far as the deficits, that started it. Now, they really got bad with, I would say, George Bush II and Obama. Because,
well, you see the debt clock.
All of a sudden, it doubled and then tripled in roughly a 10-year period. And that's unconscionable. Yeah. But, for example, the Obama bailout of the banks, $800 billion.
Yeah.
It wasn't really funded through taxes or anything. It was essentially a gift. And they borrowed the money to fund that thing. And that money didn't come back to the ordinary citizen. It went to banks and insurance companies. So
I always wonder, they're borrowing, there's this deficit, and where is it coming from? Some people have told me it comes from China.
Mostly China. When deficits first occurred during World War II, it was mostly the American people. People bought bonds. Company bought bonds. All the entertainers, Bing Crosby, were out there, buy bonds today.
Really?
Even in grade school, now this was after World War II, you would go in every day and you could buy stamps. And you could buy green stamps for $0.25 or red stamps for $0.10. And after you got up to $18, you could get a savings bond.
Wow.
We were still financing the war. Then that faded out. But since...
But there was a conscientiousness, it sounds like.
Well, it was. It was. It was patriotic.
Yeah.
But when these deficits became so enormous under Bush and Obama, most of that borrowing's been from China. The American people just won't invest that kind of money in bonds. So we borrow from China because they have a lot of American dollars. The government can't just print up money like a lot of people think.
Yeah.
Because then the supply of dollars out there gets so large it becomes worthless.
Yeah,
so while the supply of dollars is large, it is finite. There is a limit to it. And so that's what gives it its value. There's billions of dollars, but when you spread it over the world population, it's still a relatively scarce good. So you can't just add to it because it's worthless. So you have to borrow from somebody that has it, and right now China has it. So most of the recent borrowing from China's happy to loan it to us because then we turn around and buy all this Chinese stuff with it. So that helps them too.
So is America going to pay them back?
No, we're just going to pay interest on it, pretty much forever.
It's like an eternal.
Yeah, it is.
It's hard to get your
we're never going to pay off the debt. Now, just like a very rich man, like a Trump, he can run a lot of debt and keep paying the interest on it. It's not a big problem for him. Countries can do that too. Countries can run a big debt and just pay the interest on it. The problem today is when I was a child, about 1 cent out of every dollar you paid in taxes, less than that, was used to pay off the debt. And, the government now today it's getting to the point where about a fifth of the budget is just to pay interest on the debt.
That's shocking.
Yeah, it is. So we're talking billions of dollars If we didn't have that debt, it could be used on housing or infrastructure, schools, all kinds of things.
Well,
So it's getting to the point. The interest is in a few years, if this continues, it's going to be more than the military budget. So in that sense, it's almost a waste,
Well, I would need a very long time to fully get my head around this stuff. So I want to go back to the beginning of your life, which coincides with a major economics figure, a major economist. I believe was Keynes born
Right.
the year. Sorry, he died the year.
He died the year I was born.
So tell me about the significance of him.
Okay.
I had an economics teacher in high school, and we used to joke because you're not supposed to go looking up your teachers on Facebook. One of his profile pictures was a picture of Keynes, and this was a very serious man, the teacher, and even he felt compelled to do that, because Keynes was on the front of Time magazine.
Oh, yeah.
Keynes was a big deal, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Try to.
I would say generally, after Adam Smith, considered the most important economist ever lived.
And why?
Because he revolutionized the idea that governments had no responsibility for inflation or unemployment or low output. Before Keynes, most governments just assumed that in the long run, all these things took care of themselves. You might have some unemployment, but you wait a while, it'll go away. You might have inflation, you wait. And Keynes said, no, these things can persist for a long time. And there are real economic consequences. And whereas the old classical school focused a lot on the long run, one of Keynes' most famous lines is, in the long run, we're all dead. The short run's important. And if you're unemployed for a year and someone tells you, wait 2 years and jobs will come back, it's not very satisfying. What are you supposed to do for those 2 years? So he really got involved, and he tried to push Franklin Roosevelt and others to run deficits, to create projects, to create income. And then whoever got that income would spend it, and that would be income for somebody else, and et cetera, et cetera. So he said in bad times, it's up to the government to actually run these deficits, to do something about unemployment. That is very important. Now, the way Keynes got lost is when order was restored, Keynes felt the government should kind of back off, go back to its old way. And that hasn't been what's happening. Government's gotten more intrusive than ever. They have more programs than ever.
So we didn't listen enough to Keynes, basically. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. There's a real good book. I think he's by a Swedish guy.
We took the good stuff and then we didn't want to listen.
Yeah, Axel Lejeune or something is his name. And he wrote a book on Keynesian economics and the economics of Keynes. And he said the economics of Keynes are different from what today's Keynesian economists think it is. That they just want kind of... They like the spending and the deficit part, but the idea of pulling back, nobody seems too crazy about that part.
No one likes that.
And certainly Obama's, he has Keynes, his advisors were mostly Keynesian, and they're all for spending.
Well, what was Keynes's life like?
He was, well, of course he was brilliant. He wanted to work for the government. He went to the best schools. His father, I believe, was an economist. He went to the best schools, took his civil service exam, got his worst marks in economics on the exam, and he later wrote, that's because I knew more than my examiners did.
Wait, he got a bad grade on the economics?
Yeah, it was very low. And he said because he understood what was going on and other people didn't. So he's a cocky guy. Yeah. And he went to work for the Bank of England. He was present at the Treaty of Versailles, where they laid down the terms for the Germans to end World War II. And he quit the conference and said, this is not going to work. These payments you're requiring of Germany are just impossible. And he went back to England and wrote a book, The Economic Consequences of Peace. which basically said the economic terms of this treaty are prohibitive, and you're just making a permanent enemy out of Germany. And he more or less predicted World War II. He didn't predict Hitler, but he said, Germany's just not going to stand still for this. Yeah. You want them to rebuild their economy, and England and France, and they can't do it. Yeah. And so this book made him world famous. That's where he first did it. So then he went to work at private industry. He played the stock market, made a fortune. And then he became he was well known throughout this period. He was really a celebrity economist, if there is such a thing. But he, he played cards with the Duke of Windsor, and, he moved in these elite circles, and he helped establish the London Ballet Company.
Wow, with all his money.
Yeah, with all his money. What he did, the greatest ballet stars were in Russia, and he sponsored Russian tourists to come to the London Ballet, and they really taught England how to dance, in essence. And in fact, one of their star ballerinas defected from Russia, Maynard Keynes, wow. Beautiful woman. But he did that. He was a real patron of the arts. He sponsored some artists and musicians and stuff, and he said money wasn't to be valued for itself, but what you could do with it. And he spent in the arts.
And so could it be said, I'm completely speculating here, but could it be that these Keynesian economists say things about the unpopular side of his policies, and the politicians don't want to listen because it'd be unpopular? Do you think that has anything to do with it? Or do you think the economists...
No, I think what's happened is Keynes was focused more on unemployment during the recession.
Yeah.
And in the good times, there have been interpreters of Keynes that feel this is what he must have been heading towards as far as, say, inflation.
Yeah.
And he really wasn't.
Okay.
I think they've carried his thought process ahead for him. It's like when Ian Fleming dies, and now they have new guys writing James Bond novels, So I think people said, well, a logical consequence of Keynes is this stuff, and it wasn't.
Okay.
So
I'm struck because Keynes was clearly, or should I be calling him Keynes?
Yeah.
Keynes or Keynes? I heard
Keynes. Well, either.
I'm going to stick to Keynes if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm actually from closer to England, so maybe...
Yeah, maybe. No, you're probably closer to his pronunciation than I am.
But he was a public servant, clearly, and had an interest in the public interest. And I'm struck that guys like Keynes today are probably swallowed up by someone like McKinsey or Coke or Walmart, and basically the private sector. And the best of the best and brightest, because there's just so much money out there with the big companies. Is that...
Well, I think that's true in some cases.
Some of the best talent,
but sure. Now, certainly Bill Gates has been generous with his money. And
but I mean people working for a government...
a government agency.
Wouldn't it be great if we had Bill Gates working in the government? Or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I'm speculating.
I don't know. I still think right through the 1950s, our politicians or our elected representatives and the president were still largely public servants and statesmen. And now I think they've become politicians.
That's what I mean, statesmen.
Yeah.
Or women.
Yeah, I think we've lost the idea of statesmen. And that's why whenever they take polls of Congress and everything, they're rated so low because we don't feel they're working on our behalf anymore. We think they have their own agenda. Maybe it's just loyalty to party, They can reverse their positions in midstream depending on who wins the election. Whereas I think we used to elect people because we thought they more or less reflected our values. And even when we disagreed with them, there was reasoning behind their decisions. Politicians used to say, I was elected here. That doesn't mean I always ask the people what's right.
Yes.
I'm here for my views.
Yes.
And if they don't agree with me, they can vote them out. Well, I don't think they think that way. Like a Bill Clinton. I don't think he was immoral. I think he was more or less amoral.
Yes.
That he didn't have
I get you.
any principles.
A moral compass.
Right. So if a poll said you should blow west, he blew west, and blow east, Whereas even George Bush too, who he did have a value structure. You may not agree with it, but he did have certain things he held dear and wouldn't cross. I think Clinton would do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think that's a good barometer.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of a grumpy skeptic.
But I see what you're saying. They don't seem to have something inside them,
right?
A conscience that no matter what, I'm sticking to this. I'm sticking to my guns.
John Kennedy, before he was president, wrote a book, Profiles in Courage. And those chapters are about various people who did something following their conscience. And they may have paid some kind of a price politically or something. They got voted out of office. But they tried to do what was right.
Look at the greats like Lincoln and these guys.
Oh, yeah. Those are phenomenal. Even Gerald Ford, When he became president, one of the first things he did was pardon Richard Nixon. Mm-hmm. Man, did he get criticized by everybody, especially the Democrats. Mm-hmm. But in later years, the Kennedy Foundation, Ted Kennedy, they gave him an award saying, at the time, we all thought you were nuts, but it was really the right thing to do because we would have been so hung up on that for years. And can the ex-president go to trial? And should we throw him in jail? And by pardoning him, all that went away. Yeah. And we went back to work. So, there's a guy who did what he thought was right. I don't think he was one of the great intellectuals or anything, but he was a good person.
I get you. I like one. We're reading Locke in Political Philosophy, where we were a couple of weeks ago, and one thing that I took from it was his ideal politician isn't a full-time politician. Someone you kind of go to your meeting and you go home.
Yeah.
And you live your life, So you're not too heavily invested.
Yeah,
in it.
And originally that was possible. We had citizen statesmen, they would call. And with Washington, they went like for 2 months or so. And the rest of the year, you did your other thing. But it has become a full-time thing, for better or worse. For better or worse. They have all these huge office buildings, just to house the offices of these people now, it wasn't always that way. This huge representative got this luxurious office and all kinds of little side offices for the staff and everything. Yeah. I mean, it's just become this enormous thing. And it used to be, you ride your horse from Virginia to Washington for a couple of months, you ride your horse home, Yeah. So it is.
Well, let's fast forward a little bit.
Oh, okay.
And you said something a couple of classes ago that caught my ear. And sometimes I find it hard to stay present in a class, but any time you start telling a story, I wake up, and this one was about a bit of political skullduggery.
Chicanery, yeah.
Skullduggery is too harsh a word, but a bit of messing that went on.
Yeah, okay.
In a state in which I lived for 2 years. So please recount that
okay.
story. As
I'm going to maybe not be as detailed because I don't want to get in trouble, but and this is based on a true story. Mm-hmm. There was a state school who had some very powerful political figures, especially in the U.S. Senate. And it came down the pipe, this would be in the, I guess, mid-'70s, that the government was going to close some of its military bases, try to rein in the costs a little bit. Mm-hmm. And one of these bases was located in this state. And very conservative southern state. And this senator was outraged, kind of. So he went to the state university and told them that he wanted, because there was a military base in that state that had a lot of economic benefits to the state in the form of they housed all these troops there, which is, going back to Keynes, there's a multiplier effect. That means there's houses built and these soldiers buy cars and they go to the grocery store. And there's, whatever the military outlay is, it gets magnified as it goes through the community. So this senator said he wanted the business school to come up with a document that showed how devastating it would be to close this military base. Well, the dean of the school gave it this task. It had to be done within 20 days, something like that.
But you weren't just any old student now. You were a PhD student.
Yes.
So
it was given to doctoral students, a couple doctoral students to do this. Yeah. It wasn't just a student project or something. And they picked two of us. And the one guy, Jerry, he started writing the document even before we had numbers. We knew we were going to say, housing will be down by so much in the retail trade and, restaurant business and some of these places like that. So, it'll be, blank dollars. And I went and got statistics from the Labor Department about these various Keynesian multipliers. Some industries like construction typically has a big multiplier effect, because if you put up a building or a house, you have electricians, you have plumbers, you have air conditioning, heating, all kinds of wiring, maybe elevators, all kinds of drywall. I mean, this money filters out to a lot of people, and from them it filters out to even more. But in the process of doing this, we concluded that there would definitely be losses from closing this military base, but they may be more than offset by some of the benefits of closing this military base, especially if they turned it into an industrial park to attract new technology, new jobs, provide some employment output for university graduates, and all these kinds of things. But we knew that isn't what the dean wanted or the senator. In fact, we talked about it. So we did finally come up with a report where we put all the devastating effects of closing this military base would be, but we didn't include any of the potential benefits of an industrial park or putting it to some alternative use. And so we turned that into the dean, and the dean gave it to the senator. And eventually, not only was the base not closed, they allocated more money to the base, and it became one of the biggest in the Southeast. And
they expanded it.
Right, they expanded. And, there's a saying in statistics, if you torture the data, it will confess. And essentially, there was nothing untrue in this report, but there was an awful lot left out. And so, I like to caution people, whenever you see data, like right now, there's a lot of data coming out in support, say, of Elizabeth Warren's proposals against it. The data takers and the data processors sometimes have a bias. And you can't always take it as gospel. Now, there is supposed to be a congressional budget office that is non-political, non-biased. And usually their numbers are pretty close to the truth. Okay. But if you think, if a Democratic committee or a Republican committee comes out with some report, I think you need to look at it with a grain of salt. Okay. So a lot of people think her programs are very costly, but then on the other hand, they say nobody will have to pay for health care or for college. And will those benefits offset the fact that you're going to have to pay higher taxes? My own opinion is no, but that's the argument. So this was actually a case where we truly produced data that supported our point of view or the desired point of view, but it wasn't complete.
Yes, it
wasn't. It wasn't an objective view of the situation.
Yeah.
We were there to sell a certain point of view, and we did.
And it wasn't comprehensive.
No, it wasn't comprehensive, and it, I hate to say it, but it was borderline propaganda. It was true.
Yeah.
There's the old story of an American and a Russian car were in a race. This is supposed to be an example of propaganda. And the American car won the race easily. But in the Russian news outlets, they said there was this big race. The Russians finished second, and the Americans were next to last. So that's actually true. But, the value of reading that certainly paints a different picture from what really happened.
One thing that kind of similar to what you're saying, I have a cousin, I think the husband of my second cousin up in New York, live in Brooklyn, and they despise de Blasio, the mayor of New York. And it seems that New York, the city at least, is very liberal and very supportive of that agenda. Maybe they don't like de Blasio now after he's been in power, but you would think that there's some continuity there among the opinion of the people of New York. However, it turns out that only a tiny fraction of people even voted in that election. So a certain newspaper can say, for argument's sake, 90% of people come out in support of de Blasio.
Right.
For argument's sake. But in reality,
it's 90% of the voting.
20% voting.
Yeah.
So it's funny. It's how you look at it.
Oh, yeah. And even in this country, rarely do 50% of the populated voting members vote.
Which goes back to the faith in the system and the statesmanship or whatever.
Right.
However you want to call that.
Right.
It's the same issue.
And there are a lot of people say if you don't vote, you shouldn't be entitled to criticize. I mean, if you don't even exercise your responsibility. But, a lot of countries have a much more vigorous voting population than the United States. And in this country, I'll tell you, one of the areas is young people. Young people, college people.
Yeah.
Most of them won't vote.
But they probably will in 20 years.
Well, yeah, they will when they're older.
Yeah.
But say like increasing Social Security payment. Everybody my age is going to vote for it.
Yeah.
And if young people don't say, hey, what's that going to do to me in taxes? I'm going to be working and supporting these people. If they don't get represented in there, let their congressman know how they feel, well, what way is he going to vote?
But to be honest,
he's going to vote with the people that elect him.
I wouldn't have a lot of sympathy, to be honest, for young people politically because...
Well, they're typically not politically aware.
Yes, but sometimes they're delirious and raging about things. But one thing that I loved, someone said it like this: would you rather be rich and old or young and poor? I'd say a lot of rich old people would love to be 20 years old again.
Oh yeah.
And yes, maybe the old people aren't like. Everyone is self-interested, The difference with the old people and the young people have had to work and they've had to pay their taxes and they've seen a lot more of life than the young people. So I think their judgment is often a little bit more measured and backed by experience. Maybe not, they haven't done all the reading like a smart-ass college student, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but virtually everybody is more idealistic in their youth than they are later.
Exactly.
And you can go to any population anywhere and you'll find the older people, even the older people, say in the Soviet Union, or what's now Russia. A lot of them still hunker for the old days, with Khrushchev and that totalitarian system because it took care of them. And the young people like the idea that I can go and make my own way and I can be successful on my own. So that happens a lot. Yeah, so, you're in college, things are great. You want to save the whales and clean up the environment. And then you get out there working, and you have taxes to pay, and you have a family, and tuition, and some of these other things become suddenly more real.
I suppose the best way is for everyone to be actively involved, isn't it?
I suppose. But again, a lot of young people, they don't know who's running. No. They have no experience with Social Security. They don't know what it's like, or Medicaid for the poor, So it may be harder for them to focus on those issues. But they do tend to be more idealistic, and that's understandable. Most of them, all their needs have been taken care of.
Exactly.
I mean, mom and dad are paying for school. They go over to the cafeteria. They get a lunch, which they may or may not be crazy about, but it's always there. Yeah. They got a bed to sleep in.
Yeah.
All right. All of a sudden they're 30, and they have to supply their stuff themselves, and their views get more pragmatic, let's say.
Well, Mr. Kenny, you often you would be very skeptical about proposals from people like Elizabeth Warren and that kind of thing. I'd be interested, maybe that had a lot to do with your involvement in that report that we talked about. You kind of you got a glimpse into the political system and how these guys work, that an ordinary, maybe more naive person might not have. So, can you just take me through how you see this batch of presidential candidates that we have at the moment? There's obviously Donald Trump for the Republicans. We have Joe Biden, whose campaign maybe hasn't been moving
hasn't electrified anybody, no.
Yeah, exactly. But it still maintains a good bit of support. Obviously, you have Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and one guy who's interested me is Andrew Yang. He seems like a good guy. I don't know if his proposal will work, but can you just talk about that race as you see it and some of those individuals?
Well, obviously, I'm pretty conservative, and this school is maybe unusual in that the economists here are pretty conservative, whereas most schools are pretty liberal. But a lot of things, I wouldn't put too much emphasis on that experience I had in college with torturing the data. Things have changed a lot, and a lot of it has really changed since Watergate, when they caught Richard Nixon doing unsavory things. And these candidates come under such scrutiny now that didn't used to happen. And I think it's really hard now to find good, able people who are willing to run. Because almost everyone has a skeleton in their closet.
Yes.
And, John Kennedy, he's revered by a generation. Well, he was a philanderer. Yeah. There's no doubt he had various affairs while in office, but nobody wrote about them. Yeah. But with the fall of Nixon, and then they had Gary Hart was running as a Democrat. He was a senator. And he was accused of being kind of a philandering guy. And he used to tell the reporters, come follow me. You'll see there's nothing up. And they did follow him, and they caught him on a boat with his mistress, And so there was a candidate the last time around. I believe he's the governor, or was the governor of Indiana. Very pragmatic guy. I like the guy a lot. He had a wife who left him for a while, lived with a gentleman, I believe, out in California, and believed she made a mistake, came back to the governor, and they've continued on together. He just doesn't want to put his wife through all the grief that running for office would involve. And so there are good people out there, but it's hard to get them to run. And now we've had such this schism between the Republicans and the Democrats, and, generally the candidates for the Democrats are ultra-right,
You mean
or ultra-left,
yeah.
and the Republicans favor a more rightist slant, and we just don't seem to have moderates anymore.
No.
And it goes back to that thing this whole conversation started with statesmen versus politicians, and being elected for your views rather than what the pollsters say.
Yeah.
And of course, then we have the internet now, and everybody's views are out there. You can, whether they're true or false, with something else we didn't have. So it's much more complicated to find good people who will run today, I think.
Well, what about Joe Biden? Doesn't he sound more moderate than the
He
rest?
does sound more moderate. I just think he's, for me,
Maybe not competent?
no, I think he's old and establishment.
Yes.
I just think, I mean, all these people are 70s or older.
Yeah.
And I would just like to see some new blood in there. There's good thinking people in their 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
I mean, the candidates are basically old white men.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I'd love to support a woman.
Mm-hmm.
I think the country's more than ready for a woman. Mm-hmm. But she would have to meet certain pragmatic and kind of conservative values to please me. I say I'm fiscally conservative, but socially, I can be pretty progressive, you know? Yeah. But I think our finances have really gotten out of control, and I think Democrats are just going to make it worse. So that's why I have a hard time with them. But again, that's just me. There's hundreds of millions of people. People all have different views of what's important.
Yeah. Well, I was playing tennis with a few middle-aged men yesterday. I think they're about in their 40s, the three of them. And we got talking about the election. And they were telling me that even if Elizabeth Warren is going to win the primary, that the central people in the party won't let her run. And they're going to throw in Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama.
Oh, my God.
Or someone more palatable at the last minute.
No, I don't believe that.
So that they avoid catastrophe that might result.
No,
Is that pure nonsense?
To me, it is.
Okay.
To me, it is. The Clintons' time has ended,
but
and
forget the name. I just mean someone to come in.
I just don't see it happening.
Okay.
I don't see it happening.
So you think these people we have now will be there to the race?
Right.
Alone?
Now, again, back in the 40s and 50s, a lot of these conventions were controlled by a lot of bigwigs and stuff, and there was a lot of behind-the-scenes maneuvering.
Yeah.
But I think they've become much more democratic, and it would be hard if Elizabeth Warren wins the Democratic primaries to deny her the position. I just have to believe that's true.
Fair enough.
But I do think the end result would be, ideally for me, Trump resigned, or he was on the verge of impeachment, and somebody stepped in there. The last election, I actually used Paul Ryan as a write-in candidate. He was the former Speaker of the House. Yeah. Pragmatic man, good Catholic, so he counts for something. And he actually had proposals to attack things like Medicare, Medicaid, which just get Social Security, they just get pushed down the road. I think he'd be a good guy. But even he got tired of Congress. He didn't go for re-election. And so I would like to see a candidate like that, left or right. I mean, Republican or Democrat. Yeah. Get away from these extremes. Compromise has become a bad word. It never used to be. There are plenty of ways they agree on infrastructure and immigration, but they want a whole package. Take pieces.
Yeah.
Build something. Get started on the way.
And that's how real life works. Like,
it is.
If let's say you're my boss and I'm the worker, I can't have everything my way and you can't have everything your way.
No, that's right.
We have to work together.
That's right.
I want more money. That has to be okay with you.
Yeah.
If you want me to work for $5 an hour, I'm not.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
So you have to.
But maybe I can do things for you that will make you more productive.
Yeah.
That will enable me to pay you more money.
Yeah.
We can work together on this. Yeah. And Yeah, the idea that just because Trump says something, you've got to be opposed if you're a Democrat, and vice versa. I mean, they're just at each other's throats.
So I'm 21 years old right now, and I don't know what I should do, where I should get my news, because it seems oftentimes it can be agenda driven.
Yes, it can be.
So what should I do you think?
I don't know. I don't know. News isn't like it used to be. You can ask older people. We thought Walter Cronkite was a saint.
Yeah.
He came on and gave us the news. Now, CNN, Fox, they come up with one story right now, impeachment, every night, and then they go to their panel of talking heads. Mm-hmm. Why? Mm-hmm. Give me the facts.
Yes.
And let me process this myself.
Well,
I mean, on CNN, they're going to be mostly liberal, and they're going to reinforce each other and tell you what their view is. You go to Fox, they're going to be mostly conservative. I guess you just got to dabble around, try to get the evidence. And
I think talking to people is
it is.
Very helpful.
It is.
Good old
But, like, I also get The Economist, which is a big deal in Europe. We had Time magazine and Newsweek, but The Economist is just a super magazine, kind of pricey. But I mean, they cover the world. There are other issues. There are things going on in the Sudan and Africa, and American news lately. Just like we say, we have politicians and not statesmen anymore. Yeah. I think we have commentators. Yes. And not journalists anymore.
Yes, I just wanted to point that out.
Because they interpret the news and don't just give you the news anymore. So journalism has become a lost art.
My dad is a broadcaster back home, and it's funny trying to describe to people here what his job is. They don't get it. Mm-hmm. You don't have people like that in America who try to present a neutral stance.
Right. No, you don't.
And my tennis coach, funnily enough, and he didn't mean anything wrong by it, but he was telling someone else about my dad, and he said his dad is a political guy back home. And I said, well, no, he's not political. He's a broadcaster or something. And my coach said, oh, well, he's a political commentator now. I said, no, he's not. Yeah. He would lose his job if he was.
Oh, yeah. No, it's very different.
But
in fact, late night, sometimes I do want like BBC News.
Exactly.
That's
what I'm talking about.
Yeah. We don't have anything in this country like that right now.
No, doesn't exist.
No,
and that concept is so alien.
Oh yeah, it's different.
Yeah.
And again, there's a lot of sources. The internet and the idea of personal privacy, like for political candidates, is gone and. Yeah, it's kind of a mess. Tell you the truth, I'm kind of glad I'm old and I ain't going to be around here. But I fear for my grandchildren. Mm-hmm. The kind of world we're leaving them right now isn't to. Now I hear Trump's going to pull out of the climate accord. Mm-hmm. How can he do that in good conscience? Yeah. 200 nations have agreed to it or something. He's the first one to say no. He's going to pull it. It's insane, I think. So, I'm not crazy about the idea of Trump getting reelected, but then I look at Elizabeth Warren. I'm not crazy. It's the last time we had Trump and Hillary. What do you do? I mean... Yeah.
Well, again, I heard someone describe Trump lies in a kind of an immature, self-interested way, where Clinton's lies seemed more calculated.
Oh, yeah.
And thought out or something.
Oh, yeah. No, they're definitely...
Deeper.
Players, So, like that whole thing with her emails. She decides what is irrelevant and deletes them. He said, "Oh, these had nothing to do with politics." Well, how can we possibly ever know that? Mm-hmm. I think they are crafty, and I don't trust them at all. Well, now, he was a very popular president. He's a nice guy. I'd love to hang out with him.
Sorry, you're talking about Bill Clinton.
Yeah, Bill.
Sorry, I was talking about Hillary.
Yeah, Hillary is the one that erased her emails when she was Secretary of State.
I got it.
and she had them all on a private thing, and she went through and said, well, she kept the ones that were relevant to her office, but all the private ones she deleted.
So Bill Clinton, you were saying, was a popular president?
Oh, he was, I think, very popular. Yeah. And he's a fun guy. I mean, he's eating hamburgers at McDonald's, and he's jogging, and he's playing the saxophone. I'm sure he's a hoot to hang out with. But as I said earlier, I think he's completely amoral. I think he has no.
Gets all the women.
Oh well, there were things going on with women with him, and I think sometimes we overemphasize that. Nixon was a terrible person, but he did go over to China and open a dialogue with them. Yes. Pretty significant accomplishment. Yeah. He'll never be remembered for that. He'll just be remembered for lying.
Well, Mr. Kenny, I think it's very powerful to say this president will be remembered for this, because you literally remember a large number of presidents. I don't know how many, probably more than 10. Last question, can you tell me which of the presidents, firstly, how many have you witnessed?
Well, the first one I remember at all was Eisenhower when I was a child. And I think, some people don't give him the credit he deserves, I think. I think with the passage of time, he was quite an effective president. Again, he made us aware of the power of certain groups. He also, one of his projects was the interstate highway system. Yeah. Man, that's a fantastic system, roadway system we have in the United States. And presidents since, it's hard to think of a comparable project that they've endorsed or been behind. Now, there has been a lot of social progress in areas of civil rights and, being more of some kind of socialist leanings in terms of taking care of people, health care and things like that. Certainly Ronald Reagan was a popular president with conservatives. We essentially credit him with bringing down the old Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall. I guess those would be standouts. Mm-hmm. They're Republican. I thought John Kennedy, had he lived, might have accomplished some great things. Yeah. He certainly put together one of the most intellectual cabinets ever. Persons chosen for their abilities and their intellect. They weren't just political appointments, I thought George Bush I might have accomplished great things. He was certainly the most prepared person to ever be president. He served as a representative. He served as vice president. He headed the CIA for a while. He was an ambassador to the United Nations for a while. And he did the first Saudi war, where we went in there, 3 days it was over. Mm-hmm. But he made the fatal flaw of saying no new taxes. And he did raise taxes, and he got crucified for it. Wow. I mean, he might have been very, very good had he served more than one term.
So no one's perfect. But
nobody's perfect. Yeah. Some are better than others.
Except for Keynes.
Keynes.
Well,
he's certainly an admired economist, and but not universally loved. There's an Austrian school that thinks doesn't think very highly of government involvement in the economic process, but he certainly had a huge effect. Certainly.
Well, on that note, wish to thank you very much. We said initially half an hour we'd talk about the military.
Yeah, a little over an hour now.
Yeah, the military base. That was kind of what I caught you on. I was
like, yeah.
But I stretched it out, and I thank you for your willingness.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Thanks for
I apologize if I'm kind of mumbly on these things. When I first came down here from Pennsylvania, I talked so fast nobody could ever understand me. Now I've slowed it down a lot, and I think I slur a lot.
Okay.
So maybe nobody can understand me now either. So
Well,
we'll see how it goes.
I think you're just.
You're an interesting guy, Ferguson. I like the way you go beyond the classroom to explore thoughts.
I need to listen in the classroom maybe a bit more.
Well, you're all right. You're a pretty smart guy, and you do what you have to do in the classroom. But you're thinking beyond that.
Well,
Maybe you will be the next great journalist.
Well, maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Go beyond the commentator. Maybe the next great statesman.
Yeah.
You're a young guy.
Well,
You've got thoughts.
I
wish the young people would get more involved in the political process, support candidates, and go out there, find out what the issues are, then run for city council or something and move on up. But a lot of our young people are...
Well, I think people need to be very careful before they start preaching.
Oh, yeah.
At a young age.
No.
So I do agree people need to take part, but I think you need to be very careful. I used to have this idea that I'd like to go into politics, but I think you need to bloody shut the hell up until you have a bit of bit of experience and a bit of knowledge and a bit of
and you have to realize that everybody does have personal biases.
Yes.
And there may be strength in the other guy's point of view.
Yeah.
You don't have to absorb all of it, but you can't just throw it all out either.
But if you're young and you go into it, I just feel like you could be swayed with.
Well, you can.
So
you can.
Anyway.
So you want to be educated, and you want to talk to people other than just those that agree with you.
Exactly.
Right.
Anyway, I don't know what to think, but that's why I'm talking to people like you.
Okay.
Trying to figure things out. So thank you.
All right. So, okay. Now go talk to the people in Cottonwood, right? Yeah.
Greenwood, you mean?
Oh, Greenwood. I'm sorry.